Hey everybody, it's Joe from Gadgetry Tech, and in today's video I'm going to talk about the Audio-Technica ATH-ADX3000. This is a mouthful to say. This is a $1,000 open back dynamic headphone, and it's of course a very lightweight headphone, and it's well made. I'm going to get into all that, but I wanted to start with the basics. Now, this was sent to me from Audio-Technica for review. It won't affect what I say about it, it never does, but I do want to thank them for doing so, and I also don't do any affiliate or special marketing links through any of these programs. I'm not doing this for money, I just do this because I like the hobby and I want to share my experiences with these products with you all. As far as what's included, well, this part's going to be quick. You have a case that looks metallic, but this is basically a plastic briefcase, a couple latches on it, and then you have the cutout and the styrofoam insert. And this pocket here houses not only the paperwork, but also the very long cable. This comes with a 10-foot long or 3-meter long rubber cable. It's like a TPU rubber. 1/4 inch or 6.3 adapter on the end, and then like some other Audio-Technica headphones, this uses the A2 DC connector. It's technically a proprietary connection. It's not like the universal 3.5 millimeter or mini XLR, for example. So even if this is a superior connection, you know, they're using it because they wanted something that's reliable, performs well. You know, you get a nice tactile click when you put it in. I prefer universal connection types from the ability to swap your own cables out, but this does feel rather robust. This cable is crazy long. It's the only one included in the box. So I've pretty much always kept mine coiled up like this just because I don't need that kind of length. Now we need to talk about build quality and comfort. This is going to be a killer thing about this headphone because one, it is crazy light, 257 grams. It's a paperweight compared to a lot of other headphones. I have headphones in the same price range that are over double the weight of this, which is pretty absurd. It's built well. It's a magnesium alloy frame. You get this like dual split headband design. It's a really compact design, and if you wear a hat, this little groove on top is kind of nice for that if you have a little ball cap piece sticking up. It also helps with hot points or pressure points on your head. So it looks like it's rather thin, but there is a little bit of a padding here. It might come across as maybe more uncomfortable than you would expect because the padding is so thin. But one thing I've noticed is because it's light, it's really stable on my head, partly because the clamp force is rather strong for how light it is. I built my own rig to measure clamp force, and my rig shows this having about 750 grams of clamp force on a head of a similar size to my own. Comparable Sennheiser products typically have less clamp force than this one, and those are typically considered a more clampy headphone. So I still find this very comfortable for a few reasons. One, the pads are huge. The skin feel is really nice on this because it has this soft velour. The pad opening is large enough for most ears, so you're not going to have an issue there. And the pad depth is just enough where my ears kind of kiss the baffle. But one byproduct of that, and I think what they were going for, is it puts the driver pretty much right on your ear, which does affect sound quality, so I'll get into that later. Now, when I put these on, I do feel the clamp force initially. It's a little bit stronger, and if you're sensitive to clamp force, this might be the only real deal breaker from a comfort standpoint. But because it's so light and the ear pads are so soft and comfortable, I can still wear these for a long period of time. You feel the pressure initially, but then it kind of just disappears on your head after a while. I've done extended listening sessions and gaming sessions with these. So to me, I think the comfort's great. Now, the only warning I want to have with comfort is you have these really nice, it's a awesome chassis from a design standpoint because you have rotating cups that also pivot and swivel. So I like the adjustability. The issue I have with this is if you have a very wide head, do you see how this kind of butts up against the fork? Well, as you get to a certain point, you can see that the cups are angled slightly down. And there's no way to compensate for that because it's resting against the chassis. Now you can extend these yokes. So you could still see like it's wide now and it's more straight, but this is a very tall and wide head. If you have a shorter and wide head, I think ergonomically you might have an issue where you get a little bit more pressure on top. So the only change I wish I'd had is I wish this angle was just slightly more outward because then you'd have more flexibility in this direction. There's plenty here. I'm never going to need that amount of flexibility because no one's head is this small. So that would be the only critique and warning I have. Otherwise, for me, it was just enough where it was still comfortable. As far as the rest of the build quality goes, I mean, this thing is solid. I've never had a creak. This is one thing that's always stood out with me with higher-end Audio-Technica headphones is they're built extremely well. The adjustment mechanism, the connector quality and how it feels, this metal grill, everything is extremely premium. If there's one thing I can say confidently with Audio-Technica products, or at least this particular chassis design, is I expect it to hold up for a very long period of time, more than most headphone designs I felt. This is all just very robust. I know looks are very subjective, but I do want to touch on this because I just want to highlight this design. This is one of my favorite headphone designs out there, especially in this price range. I think it's gorgeous because it's subtle enough where it's not too flashy or gaudy, but you can kind of appreciate some of the engineering behind it the more you look at it. I just think it's a really clean aesthetic. It doesn't look too bulky or ridiculous on my head, but it still feels like you got a premium product for as light as it is. A lot of times if they're really light, there's some sacrifices on aesthetics and how it feels, but Audio-Technica navigated that really well, where it's very lightweight, very comfortable, but still feels extremely premium and somehow still looks premium. All right, so now getting into sound quality, I'm going to start with the objective measurements first, which uses a measurement rig that I have here and takes my opinion out of it. It's just to kind of show you an objective take that's without bias. And if I have any bias, I will explain that, and I'll explain what I like in certain sound quality. Now, for the measurement side, I use an IEC 711 coupler clone with a Gross KB006X Pinaclone, which does affect how things are represented. It's not a B&K 5128 or a Gross 43AG. There's different types of rigs and pinas, and these simulate different responses. So there will be some variances from rig to rig and also from what you hear at home. The reason why I say all that is if you're using my site, I measure all of these the same way. I move around the driver, I remove the headphone, put it back on the rig. I take multiple measurements for each side and then I average it. So what you're seeing is an average with slight placement variation, again, on the same rig. This is helpful if you're comparing against other headphones that I've measured, so I'll have a link in the description below for that. And that shows you how my rig hears all of these headphones exclusively. Looking at the frequency response, again, this is an open back, but there's still quite a bit of sub-bass extension. It does carry down, and I only lose about 6 or 7 decibels from the bass lift that's closer to 100 hertz. So the sub-bass extension is quite nice. There's more of a W shape here going on because there's a mid-bass and upper bass boost. Just the slightest recess in the mid-range, and then it's met with more fill-in in that whole like 800 to 1500 hertz area. And then the most noticeable thing is this peak just under 4000 hertz. This is going to color the sound more than any other spot in this headphone, and it is rather aggressive. Thankfully, the Q, or how wide of a peak this is creating, is quite narrow. So if you do have the ability to EQ and this is too much of a peak for you, it's rather easy to address. I was hearing it pretty much bang on with what my rig was hearing it. It was just under 4000 hertz. So you can, if you have a 10 band, you can just pick 4000 hertz and drop it by 4 or 5 decibels, kind of start there. And then if you compare it to the Harman curve, you can see how it kind of aligns. Measurements aside, one, I do want to point out the channel matching was excellent, which is really important when you start spending $1,000. The variation was minimal, and these different peaks that you see up top are more of a byproduct of average of variation of measurements. You will have that vary greatly depending how it's placed on your head and your own hearing. I do also measure the electrical impedance of the drivers now. Eventually, I'm going to try to come up with a way to represent this data on a public forum so you can click and view impedance curves of everything I measured. The actual resonance of this particular driver is right about 87 hertz, and it goes all the way up to, I think it's about 144 ohms. So depending on what kind of amp you have, if you have high output impedance amp or like an OTL amp, you might have more of a bass lift. It will affect the sound a little bit because it's not too linear. It's pretty common with a dynamic driver, but I just wanted to point out how it measured. Now, as far as how I hear the headphones, they are bright. These are crazy eager to play vocals. Like the upper mid-range and low treble area are super excited sounding, and that 4 kilohertz is very noticeable. So I want to focus on that first, because this is going to be the greatest source of contention, whether people like or dislike this particular headphone. When you hear this peak, I think the most noticeable thing was with cymbals for me. If you have like a softer playing cymbal that's playing at a certain frequency or a certain amplitude, having this much elevation means that the decay of a cymbal, when you tap it, it kind of rings out. Well, when it's this lifted, it kind of connects the cymbal hits more together because there's less decay, which is not as natural sounding. So it greatly changes the way cymbals sound in music, just as an example. I did have to create a little bit of a filter on parametric EQ. I just took 9000 hertz or 3900 hertz I reduced it by about 6 decibels with a Q of 5, just to kind of shave off a little bit of that energy. That was to make it more usable for everything I listen to. Now, I didn't always feel I needed to do that. And there are songs like, if you listen to anything that's kind of synth heavy, certain EDM, it's not as noticeable. And if anything, it kind of wakes it up. So from a coffee caffeine scale, this is like a 6-shot espresso. It's very energetic, but the bass delivery is excellent as well. There's a little bit of warmth to it. And this is a good representation of how you can have something that may not have the frequency response that you'd expect to like, but because there's a complementary balance of frequencies, it can still be a really good listen to. That mid-bass warmth and lift that I get with the mid-range bite, like that whole, 3 to 4,000 hertz emphasis, it does still complement each other quite well. Vocals are very forward on this headphone, and I didn't have any like graininess or scratchiness with the treble either. Even though it was brighter, it was still rather smooth. I also didn't have any sibilance issues either because of the way it plays 6 to 8,000 hertz. It's not so much lifted compared to adjacent octaves. So it's not like this sharp treble just comes out of nowhere. It's all rather well connected to each other, and I think that's why this plays as a brighter headphone overall, but not overly sibilant or sharp. It's a very consistent brightness. Now, energy aside in the upper mid-range and low treble, it also has a nice bass punch too. I really do like the tactility of this bass. It has a surprising amount of extension, which is good considering it's an open back dynamic driver. You don't always get a lot of sub bass. They did a great job with that here, but it's also still sounding very fast and punchy. This tuning just happens to play well with a very wide variety of music when it comes to the bass delivery. And thanks to this driver that they developed, it actually handles EQ well on the bass side as well. So if you like the energy this has, but you want a little bit more bass lift to kind of either compensate or better tame the treble, because then you're technically tilting it down a little bit, this does take bass rather nicely and with minimal distortion. I think if you're getting a lot of bass distortion with this, you're just simply playing this at far too high of a volume. I got well beyond a comfortable listening volume with the bass I liked, and I had zero signs of distortion. Now, outside of like the cymbals I was talking about with that 4K peak, it kind of adds like a wispiness to certain vocals. Again, it's not that it's sibilant, it's not scratchy, but you can hear a huge difference when that 4K peak is active. And if you're trying to familiarize yourself with what kind of an impact that has, if you have access to parametric EQ on your headphones, take 4,000 hertz and add like 6 decibels to it with a Q of 6 or 7, just a really narrow notch, and just toggle that on and off. It's not going to be exactly like how it is here, because the rest of this, again, I was talking about adjacent frequency response kind of being filled in to balance that well. But this coloration sometimes just wasn't for me. And when I did EQ, this became something that was a little bit too bright and energetic for like daily driving for me, to quickly becoming one of my favorite headphones in this price range. So this is one of those things where it really comes down to how valuable is a EQ to you. Is that off the table entirely? And if it is, it's not that this is a bad headphone. It's just expect to have a more forward, more vocal, more energy in the vocal range. And if you are chasing that, it's still a wonderful headphone. Technicalities, resolution, clarity, absolutely incredible. This is the only dynamic I've heard in this price range that can actually go toe-to-toe with Hi-Fi-Man headphones like the Aria Organic, for example, which says a lot about this headphone, because a lot of dynamics, to me, I don't think they have the same perceived clarity and resolution of a high-end Hi-Fi-Man for the money. That's kind of like where Hi-Fi-Mans have always excelled for their price, is the clarity and resolution. Well, now you're getting that with this, but you get a really good dynamic punch, you get incredible build quality, and because it's very lightweight, it's also very comfortable. Now, getting into gaming performance, this is going to be a really hot item for the ATH-3000, because this rose right to the top of one of my favorite headphones I've ever used for gaming. And the meta for gaming headphones, or whatever you want to call it, it's been kind of static for a while. There's always been great picks. Sennheiser is usually a very safe pick for gaming. I really like the Aoun AR5000, and some people like Hi-Fi-Man and Meze products as well. But when you do some EQ with this to, I guess, tame the 4K a little bit, this one really didn't need EQ for gaming for me. I just brought that down for Call of Duty because it complemented Call of Duty sound signature better. I don't recall ever having a headphone that felt more directly connected to what was going on in the game with less audio confusion than this for the money, period. I did a lot of like blind listening, or I should say a non-biased listening approach when I was trying to find what's the best headphone I can use for Call of Duty. And I have the HD800S, I have the ZMF Caldera, I have a lot of products from Meze Audio, Sennheiser, like everything. And it didn't matter the price. I was trying to find anything that would stand out. The Aria Organic had been the best one I'd ever used on Call of Duty. This is like so close, and in some cases better than the Aria Organic, even without EQ. They really go toe-to-toe for games like Call of Duty. That says a lot about this, and this thing's crazy comfortable. When I did some EQ, I wasn't confused. Everything can sound very clear. It still sounds spacious, but it's so precise on where it plays notes. And this does translate to music as well. There's just an amazing connection that you have to the source without like doing it in a punishing way. And the soundstage is wide, but it's not so wide that things become incoherent and you can't specifically pinpoint something. It's really hard to explain. Usually IEMs have great precision for FPS gaming. It might not have the same spaciousness, or depending on what your ergonomic preferences are, if you want something in your ear or not. But there's no denying that good IEMs can be very concise in where they're pinpointing audio cues. This is one of the few headphones that will go to toe with the best IEMs, period. Obviously, it lacks noise isolation because it's a full open back, so there's no blocking of exterior noise. But I just feel like I'm more competitive when I use products like this. And it wasn't like a subtle difference. It was noticeably better than a lot of stuff I play on. So if you have a big budget and you are chasing like, FPS S tier performing products, I can just tell you without bias, the ADX3000 and the HiFiMan Aria Organic in the $1,000 range and up are pretty much the best I've ever used. I actually like them both more than the HD800S, specifically for FPS gaming. On the budget side, it's still hard to beat Sennheiser's HD560S for the money, the Aoun AR5000, and the HD490 Pro. Even the HD6XX, because it's more relaxed, that one doesn't have any like expanded sub bass or soundstage, but it's still very easy to pinpoint stuff, so that wasn't necessarily a bad product. But if I could just pick one of anything to wear for FPS gaming and I can do EQ, the ADX3000's become my go-to now. I did mention a few other headphones earlier, but I wanted to specifically call out a few of these models in this price range because I think it would be disingenuous to ignore some other amazing picks. So you have the Meze 109 Pro. I love the style of this. I mean, that is just a gorgeous headphone. Great skin feel on the pads. It just feels really nice to wear. Very comfortable on the strap. Lighter clamp force than the ADX3000, but it is heavier on the ear cup. So the weight feels heavier here, even though the padding's excellent, but there's no weight up here. It basically disappears on the top of your head. You're feeling a much more pressure, especially right here, because of the weight. Sound quality wise, things sound more distant on the 109 Pro because the mid-range is a little bit more relaxed sounding compared to the upper treble, which it's one of those things where like when you connect the dots, and you isolate different areas. This is more relaxed treble, but or mid-range, but there's more treble in comparison to the mid-range. So what happens is it sounds more distant and wide, and you have a little bit more of a higher sparkle to it, but the vocals aren't as energetic, or they have less bite to them on the 109 Pro. I still really like this for like hip-hop, EDM, for movie listening. It's a really fun listen, and I think the build quality and the style is a big reason to consider it as well. Still a wonderful headphone. I don't think it's as distinct sounding as the 3000. So if you're really trying to isolate, like if imaging is incredibly important and you want a more direct connection to your audio source as far as exactly where things should be placed, I think the ADX3000 is a little bit more concise. Now, it gets really challenging with the Aria Organic because, especially with the price cuts now, this is just an awesome headphone. Lots of sub bass, and even without EQ, and with EQ, it goes down to 20 hertz like with E. So if you're chasing really deep bass, really hard to beat the Aria Organic in this price range. It's still rather comfortable. It's noticeably heavier than this, but the clamp force is light, and because the air cups are so large, it really distributes pressure quite well. This design is going to fit differently or feel differently on different heads, so I can only explain how it feels on me. I like this strap because, again, it relieves the pressure. And from a tuning and sound quality perspective, this has always been some of the best resolving and technical headphones I've heard in this price range. So the fact that the ADX3000 is even going toe-to-toe with that says a lot about its technicality. This is a wonderful headphone. I think it gets better with EQ, but even without it, believe it or not, this sounds less energetic than the ATH-3000. The ATH-3000 is actually brighter than the Aria Organic. However, I really like the way vocals are presented on this, again, outside of that 4K peak. It's just a matter of how important EQ is to you and how much that can change what you're okay with. Without EQ, I think this is a really safe pick. It's just kind of a matter of, do you want a dynamic driver or a planar? And do you have a brand preference? I think from a build quality perspective, Audio-Technica has had a better track record, but none of my HiFiMan products have broke. So some people will talk about build quality, they always do. I've been really happy with this. I don't really have an issue suggesting it. To me, I think it's really between these two is like my favorite in this price range. Then you have the DMS Omega, which is a DIY build from the other YouTuber DMS. I just wanted to cover this because it's still valid to consider some of these other brands. There are a few DIY models in this price range, and a few of them use the Peerless dynamic driver. This has the best mid-range timbre and natural presentation of all of these. Without any EQ, things sound truer to the real life hearing of what you'd see. You know, like if you hear a artist performing an acoustic live in front of you, this is going to represent that, I think, a little bit more accurately than all of the others here. There is a little bit of a scratchiness in the mid-range. It's really subtle, but I mentioned Muse earlier, and there's like this every now and then kind of a scratchy sound that comes with his voice that doesn't sound as smooth, and it's not a pleasant thing when it happens, and I really don't know how to tame that with EQ, because all you're doing is reducing that kind of scratchy performance of the driver, I guess, which will affect timbre and kind of put vocals back a little bit. It's minor, and overall, from a tuning perspective, again, without EQ, this is still a safer setup. It doesn't have the same build quality. This is obviously, it's 3D printed. I don't feel like this thing's gonna fall apart. It just doesn't feel or look as premium as any of the other models here when you start comparing, you know, build quality and design. As far as final thoughts go with the ATH-3000, I'll admit this has actually been a tough headphone to review because I know some people aren't going to like the sound signature out of the box. It's very bright, and that 4K peak noticeably colors the sound, in some cases in a negative way. When I own things, I do EQ, and I shape, even if something measures excellent, I'm still doing some EQ to shape it to my personal preference. I think a lot of people, if you've embraced EQ, do the same. And I want to include that for consideration because at this price range, to get this level of technical performance and detail retrieval, comfort, build quality, I think the aesthetics are great. It seems like it's going to last the test of time. If you find it too bright and you don't want to do EQ, you could put the ADX5000 pad on here, which is from their $2,000 open back. That tames the treble quite a bit and I think makes it an even better headphone. But I didn't want to use that as a factor in consideration for the review because it should be reviewed as it comes out of the box. Just like, does EQ become something to consider? In my case with EQ, it's definitely one of my favorite, if not my most preferred $1,000 headphone I've been using lately once I've shaped it. The build quality, the comfort, the lightness of it, and I do play FPS gaming at night, and these are just exceptional for that. It feels so much more confident in playing audio cues and what you'd expect and what you'd want to hear. So I guess at the end of the day, you have to decide if the EQ is a factor or if this is a sound signature you're looking for. And I think if you know all that going into this, you're gonna absolutely love this headphone. I love it, and I hope you found this video helpful. So thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe so I can see you at the next video. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.